All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Definitely. Always ready to get into it.
Okay, so today we're looking at something that just dropped, like literally this week. It's about Prime Minister Trudeau, and, well, he's announced some temporary tax relief measures for Canadians, that is.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all in this CP24 article, actually.
Oh, okay.
From essential goods to common stocking stuffers, Trudeau offering Canadians temporary tax relief. That's the title. It's from November 21st, so yeah, very fresh.
So hot off the press, basically.
Basically, and people are already talking about it, debating it. Well, it's definitely got everyone's attention.
Yeah, I bet. Especially with, everything going on. The timing seems, well, interesting to say the least.
Right. Okay, so let's get into it. First up, this GST-HST holiday thing.
Okay.
2 months, no GST or HST on a whole bunch of goods. Starts December 14th, runs through February 15th. They're saying a family could save like $100 if they spend $2,000, on the stuff that's included. But does this actually help anyone? I mean, really?
It's a good question. I mean, some people would say it's just a quick fix, right? People spend a bit more for a little while and then poof, it's gone.
Yeah.
But then others might argue that it could, actually give the economy a boost, like a jump start
Yeah.
when things are a bit sluggish.
Makes sense.
But it's definitely a short-term solution, yeah. And whether it really makes things more affordable in the long run, well, that's debatable.
Totally. And then there's the question of like what's actually included in this holiday, right? Diapers, kids' clothes, prepared meals. Okay, that all tracks. But then you see video games and consoles on the list, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that is kind of a curveball.
Right. It makes you think, well, maybe this is about more than just helping people out. Maybe it's also about, getting some good press and maybe even swaying some voters, especially with the holidays coming up.
Yeah, the timing is definitely, let's say, strategic. I mean, people are already spending more around the holidays anyway, so a tax break on things like video games, well, that could definitely push people to buy.
Yeah, totally.
Hmm.
And, speaking of strategic timing, we got to talk about that Working Canadians rebate.
Ah, yes.
$250, supposed to be paid out in early spring 2025, which, happens to be right around
Oh, you mean,
election time.
right. Yeah, it's hard not to see that connection. But what's interesting is they haven't really made it clear who exactly qualifies as a working Canadian.
Hmm.
They say it's for 18.7 million people, but
Hmm.
like, what are the actual criteria? It's all a bit vague, isn't it? Almost like a carrot dangling out there, but you don't know if you could reach it.
Definitely. And while we're talking about all this, let's not forget the political backdrop, right? Minority liberal government, NDP with some real influence, and then there's this talk of a possible early election. The NDP, they're saying they're the ones who pushed for all this relief, that the liberals are basically caving to their demands. It's well, it's getting pretty dramatic, wouldn't you say?
It is. It's like watching a political play unfold in real time.
Mm-hmm.
The NDP, they want to be seen as, the champions of the working class. And with an election potentially coming up, well, pushing for these tax breaks is a pretty smart move, right? It could win them a lot of support.
Yeah.
And then the liberals, well, they're in a tough spot. They need to keep the NDP happy to stay in power, but they also need to, push their own agenda.
Yeah.
It's a delicate balancing act, that's for sure.
Totally. So the big question now is, what happens next? I mean, how do they even get any of this passed? The House of Commons is basically at a standstill right now.
Yeah.
The government won't hand over these documents. The conservatives in the bloc are like, let's have an election. It's like they're all playing chicken or something.
It's wild.
Yeah.
But actually, the NDP has this, well, it's kind of a crazy plan to get around all this. They want to use what they call a programming motion to basically fast-track these tax measures.
Yeah.
Like cut through all the gridlock.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a risky move.
Risky how?
Well, if it works, the NDP, they look like the heroes. Like they're the one who actually got something done to help people, people who are struggling. But if it backfires,
Uh-oh.
it could make things even more unstable politically, and it could even push us closer to that election that everyone keeps talking about.
Right. And maybe that's not what everyone wants, an election right now. I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. But you know what? Let's kind of shift gears for a second. Think about what this means for, the average Canadian. Like
What?
this, we've got these two big things, right? The tax break and the rebate. But will they actually make a real difference?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Like, $100 from that GST-HST thing, it could help, sure, especially during the holidays when things are tight. But for someone who's already really struggling, is it enough? I don't know.
It might not be, no. And then that $250 rebate, well, that's helpful too, but it won't last long. especially if prices keep going up,
Yeah.
or if something unexpected happens and you need that money.
So, are these things just like symbolic then? Are they more about looking good politically than actually helping people?
I think, honestly, it's probably a bit of both.
Mm.
Some people will definitely benefit from these measures, right? Like they'll see a difference in their wallets. But at the same time, yeah, it's hard to ignore the political aspect. I mean, they're designed to appeal to voters, right?
For sure.
It's like trying to find that balance,
Mm.
addressing real concerns that people have while also making sure you appeal to, well, a lot of different voters. It's tricky.
It is, but it's not just about like giving people a few extra bucks, right? It's also about sending a message like to Canadians, but also to the rest of the world, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, it shows that the government is taking this affordability issue seriously, right? But on the other hand, it could also be seen as, well, kind of a sign of weakness. Like
Hmm.
they need to stimulate spending because the economy isn't doing so well.
I see.
And then you've got the global perspective, too. Other countries are dealing with this same stuff. And what Canada does could influence how we're seen on that world stage.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's a lot bigger than just what's happening here then.
Oh, for sure. It's all connected.
Yeah.
But you know what? Thinking about all this, these short-term solutions, they don't really deal with the root of the problem, do they? Like, what about the bigger issues that are making everything so expensive in the first place?
Right, like what?
Well, housing, healthcare, childcare, all that. These are the things that are really hurting people's wallets, and these measures don't really touch on them.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might help a little, but it's not going to fix the real problem.
So then, where do we go from here? We've got these like temporary fixes, but what about the long-term solutions? Like, what kind of big changes do we need to actually make things more affordable?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's not an easy one to answer. But I think it starts with having these conversations, talking about what's really important, what our values are, and what we want the future to look like. And then holding our leaders accountable for making decisions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
So it's bigger than just like tax breaks and stuff, right? It's about building a better society, one that's fair and where everyone has a chance to, make a good living.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we need to talk about, like as a whole country, not just liberals versus conservatives or whatever. We need to find that common ground, like what do we all agree on? What do we want for Canada? And then we need to work together to make it happen.
Totally. And that kind of brings us back to that NDP thing, that programming motion. It's not just about procedure, is it? It's like a message. Like they're saying, look, we can argue about the details later, but let's at least do something. But how does it even work, this motion thing?
Well, it's like, imagine Parliament's got this big to-do list,
Yeah.
and this motion lets them put everything else on hold and just focus on this one thing, fast-tracking it.
So it's like skipping the line, basically.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's this huge traffic jam because the government won't hand over those documents, everything's stalled, and this motion is like finding a detour, getting around the roadblock.
Makes sense. But don't they need the other parties to agree to this? I mean, the Conservatives and the Bloc, they seem pretty set on having an election.
Right, that's the thing. Will they go for it? It all depends on whether the NDP can convince them that, this is about helping people, not just playing politics. It's a gamble, that's for sure.
A big one. And depending on what happens, it could change like the whole political landscape. But you know what? Let's zoom out for a second and think about like our listeners. You're hearing all this about tax breaks, rebates, elections, all that. What are you supposed to do with this information?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that, you have a voice in all this. Stay informed, talk about these issues with people, and let your elected officials know what you think. It matters what you have to say, especially in a democracy.
Exactly. And this isn't just about like saving a few bucks or whatever. It's about what kind of country we want to live in, right? A country that's fair to everyone, where everyone can have a good life. These tax measures might help a bit now, but the real work is like fixing those bigger problems that are making everything so expensive.
Totally. We need to think long term, not just quick fixes. And that means changing how we think about things, being willing to like shake things up a bit, and working together to make things better for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. Don't just sit back and watch all this happen. Be a part of it. Ask questions, challenge things, and push our leaders to do better. That's how we make Canada better for everyone.
And never stop learning. Keep asking questions, keep digging deeper.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.